Today is a day to celebrate because I am finally catching up on these wrap-up videos. Hi everyone, my name is Kayla and welcome back to Kay's Hidden Shelf where we talk about books. Today I'm going to be sharing with you everything I read back in July. I am finally catching up on these wrap-up videos and it feels so good. So overall, July was a good reading month and had quite a mixed bag of different books. A lot of them were sci-fi and different types of fantasy, from Dragon Rider to a forest godlike type world that was emotionally impactful. There were even novellas and a short book of poems. So there's quite a bit of difference in the books that I read over the month, but I absolutely had a great reading month overall, and I'm really excited to share all 6 of these books with you. The first one that I want to share with you is actually one that took me the longest to write my review and process. This is The Necessity of Rain by Sarah Chorn. Now, I highly recommend checking out this book. It is emotionally taxing. I will tell you that up front. It dives deep into emotions of loss, grief, and change, and so many more. But the way it's done is just incredible to experience, and I think everyone should give it a shot if that's something they're interested in. Sarah Chorn just captured emotional vulnerability, articulates it with beauty, and treats it with dignity in this incredible story of loss, change, and love. I'll admit, I went into this blind. I honestly had no idea what the story or the world was going to entail. I had just been hearing so much from ARC readers on how emotionally moving it was, the impact that it had on them, and that was it. I knew I needed to read this book. Now, as soon as this released, I went and picked it up. I dove right in and was met with the author's note at the beginning, which had me choking up. And that's saying something. If the story hasn't even started yet and the reader is already emotionally impacted, can you imagine what the rest of the story would be like? Now, I went into this blind. That doesn't mean you have to. This is a multi-POV story that follows 3 main characters. The first is Isra, a survivor of Dawnland who has been displaced from her home and her family. Rosemary, who is suffering from physical disability and chronic pain, but only wishes for the well-being of her own mother. And finally, Belladonna, who has returned from Dawnland to her home to confront the past she ran from. Seeing those 3 stories come together was emotionally evoking. There were several moments in this that had me reflecting on my own past or helped to give me a new perspective. This is the kind of book that will allow readers moments of retrospection, and for even those who have never experienced the heartaches that are portrayed in this book, can still find the beauty of the world, the characters, and maybe even a better understanding of those who have gone through those circumstances. In addition, the character work and their arcs are thoughtfully done. From the circumstances the characters go through to their reactions, it was incredible to read through. It was clear how much thought and planning really went into this story. Now, this kind of goes back to the beginning of what I said, where this is emotionally taxing. The story itself is exploring characters in their darkest, heaviest moments. However, it was incredibly rewarding to read, despite the heavy parts breaking my heart. As I read, the story was so masterfully expressed and quickly knit my heart back together again. Overall, this left me with a full heart by the time I was done reading, and I will never forget that feeling. In terms of the prose, it is poetic yet accessible. Oftentimes, the themes within this story are complex, yet Sarah Chorn expresses them with such simplicity, showing her skill with writing and storytelling. Now, the story was beautiful, the characters are well developed. What about the world? Simply put, it is stunning. The world is immersive and feels like something built out of a fairy tale. Gods and their divine creations fill every inch of this world with creativity and magic, while also weaving in powerful messages about mortality and the cost of their power. I often found myself immersed in the world, the beauty of it, and it's one that I've come to miss since finishing this book. Now, with all that being said, I almost DNF'd this book at 80%, and it's not what you think. I simply reached a point that was personally triggering for me, which really shouldn't be a surprise with how much emotional vulnerability is explored in this and the type of circumstances the characters go through. While I can't tell you exactly what scene was triggering due to spoilers, I will say that it is written in a way and meant to be beautiful. It is meant to be a beautiful development in the story. However, due to my own personal experiences in life, that particular development brought up a negative memory for me, and that's where it became a bit difficult. I ended up putting it down for a few days and gave it some thought and some space. After a while, I decided to go ahead and finish it. There had been so many incredible and compelling moments, and the positivity that I had experienced up to that point far outweighed the one development that had caused a bit of a negative reaction in me. The reason I think it's important to mention this is because the topics covered within this are going to contain a variety of sensitive areas for readers. It can be difficult to read as Sarah Chorn goes right for the aches in your hearts, but in the most compassionate way that I've ever seen in writing. So, was it worth it to finish the book? Absolutely. Every aspect of this book was beautiful, from the writing to the impressive world building, the storytelling. Despite that one moment hitting very negative for me, it was still a book that I am incredibly grateful to have read, and I look back on fondly. I would even like to go back to it someday, which is surprising considering how emotionally devastating that book was in the end, but I absolutely would love to read that again. Overall, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I think this would be great for readers who love fairy tale fantasies that are emotionally driven with their storytelling. After that, I read Happenings by Patricia Meredith. This is a short book of poems written by the author, and you knew I was going to fit a Patricia Meredith in here somewhere if she had another book out there. I will say I don't read poems often, so maybe take this with a grain of salt. However, I thoroughly enjoyed this. Patricia Meredith crafts beautiful poems with intent and care, from the writing to the visual aspect of it. Each one is to the point, sweet, thoughtful, and the choice of words purposeful. I ended up finding several poems that either I could relate to or ones that left me pondering. Now, I mentioned a visual aspect to this, and that's due to the formatting of the words within the poems. They're done in this way to help emphasize the poem's meaning and are meant to be read in a particular way based on their formatting. I actually learned this by watching Patricia's Meredith video on this, because otherwise I would have had no idea. Go ahead and check that out if you're interested. I'll leave a link in the cards, because it was really interesting to learn more about poetic writing and reading. Ultimately, it helps to give the poems an artful touch to them. Overall, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I had a great time with it. I walked away with some new favorite poems, and I learned something new about poetry. So I would highly recommend checking this out if poetry is something you're looking to try in your reading or you enjoy already. Afterwards, I dove right into Michael R. Miller's Ascendant. This is book 1 in the Songs of Chaos series, and let me just say, the author does not waste any time throwing readers right into adventure, action, magic, and dragons. Now, while I love dragons as magical creatures, the tropes that often follow them in fantasy stories or settings had started to feel repetitive to me in my reading quite a few years back. That is until I read Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. That one just felt so refreshing to me and left me wanting to try more stories about dragons and dragon riders. This led me to Ascendant, a self-published dragon rider fantasy and book 1 in the Songs of Chaos series. The story here follows a young boy called Holt Cook. His role in life is to serve in the Crag's kitchen and one day take over his father's role as head cook within this place. However, Holt dreams of becoming a dragon rider and serving the Order in their fight against the Scourge. Only Holt learns a dark secret: that dragons kill any eggs that are deemed weak or flawed. Stealing a doomed egg, Holt finds himself in something far bigger than imagined. Dragon riders are being slaughtered, and a race to save the world from blight, undead beings, and destruction begins. Now, I will say the main character Holt and the side cast had charming dynamics and good character developments throughout the story. Holt is 15 years old at the start of the story, and despite his young age, he has a believable maturity about him. Because he was raised in a life of servitude, he has a unique perspective into the world around him, and I loved seeing how that impacted the story and his relationships. In particular, his relationship with the dragon he takes is endearing as their bond develops and they grow together. To me, this is just as much the dragon story as it is Holt's, and the difficulties they face provided unexpected plot developments. Now, while this is a single POV, mainly from Holt throughout most of the story, towards the end of the book we do see an addition of a POV from a side character named Talia. While this can be jarring, I actually think it was done really well. It felt seamless because we had already gotten to know Talia really well up to that point, but also because it gave readers a broader look into the final scenes within this story. Something that impressed me was how effortless it was to get lost in the characters, the world, and the magic. The author naturally built every layer of this story to create an accessible read while still packing in emotional scenes and lots of action. The magic and the dragon bonds were engaging and had consequences to its use. This had a progression fantasy feel to it, and not only that, it went far more in detail than I had anticipated. It's also written in a way that allows the readers to learn alongside the characters and even gives you cooking analogies to go along with those explanations. And the foodie in me absolutely loved that. In terms of the tropes, they are done in a way that is recognizable in Dragon Rider fantasy, yet wove in unique traits from the world building. It even included elements of progression and classic fantasy, all woven in with an intricate world and lore. Overall, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This was a fast-paced, action-packed adventure that left me curious about what might happen next. I think this is a great read for fans of Aragorn, Dragon Mage, Pern. I have not read Pern, but I have heard there are similar elements to it as well, and just love dragons, high fantasy, and detailed world building. Next, I read Down Below Beyond by T.A. Bruno. I've already done a full spoiler-free review for this, so if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link up in the cards where you can find that, and I'll keep my thoughts here a bit more brief. Now, I did receive an e-arc for this one in exchange for an honest review, and Down Below Beyond was an interesting read because it is full of action. It is a self-published sci-fi that mixes in fantasy and spiritual metaphysical elements along with it. It's the perfect read for fans of fast-paced adventures, heists, found family, and high stakes with a touch of character-driven narrative. The story is told through multiple points of view and follows 2 main characters: Levrod Otra, who is a prospector on the planet Teox, who makes his way in life by scavenging the planet, and Befo Nail, who is an enforcer for the Fessenog fleet and childhood friend to Levwort. While Levwort is scavenging, he comes across the find of a lifetime, which ends up putting a target on his back. One of the things that surprised me about this is that the author managed to balance the plot-driven narrative with several character-driven aspects to help balance the storytelling. Why does this matter? Well, as a character-driven reader, this gave me some of the character depth that I often crave in stories, while still giving me the action and suspense to keep me on the edge of my seat. I was pleasantly surprised by the direction the main characters' developments and arcs took over the course of the book. Although the side cast doesn't receive as much development, they were absolutely endearing and memorable. Their roles within the story were well plotted, and I even found myself laughing out loud while I read with some of the dialogue. There were even inclusions of wholesome scenes alongside plenty of darker scenes scenes that help to raise the stakes of the story. It's impressive to see the exploration of the characters, the meaning of friendship and truth within the themes, the travel across multiple planets, battles, heists, and unexpected plot developments, all within 326 pages. While this isn't hard sci-fi, it also includes elements from metaphysical or spiritual parts of fantasy, and it even had intriguing concepts that had my imagination running wild. The battle scenes were also gripping and showcased T.A. Bruno's skills with depicting action. One thing I love with T.A. Bruno's writing as well is just the sheer creativity with the types of species and planets and anything else that is encountered in the worlds he creates, the stories that he tells. It's definitely well showcased here with all the varieties of plant life and species and creatures and everything that we come across within this story. And I always love going through that experience with T.A. Bruno's books. Overall, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I think this is a fantastic slump buster for anyone looking for their next sci-fi fantasy read. After that, I dove into a novella called Colony Collapse by K.E. Wolfe, which is co-authored between 2 authors. Now, I did receive an ebook for this in exchange for an honest review from one of the authors, and honestly, it was the sales pitch that got me and caught my interest. It was pitched to me as a blending of Star Trek: The Next Generation and Firefly. That statement alone sold me on this. I knew I wanted to try it. This novella absolutely captured the episodic nature of Star Trek and some of the world elements while bringing in the grittier tones of Firefly. Colony Collapse is episode 1 of the Shattered Stars series and marks an entertaining first installment within this sci-fi adventure. Set on the planet Janus, a world ravaged by storms, the story follows 2 main characters. Crumb, a young man born on the planet Janus alongside with his people, are planet-bound, having never traveled the stars, and Fatch, a visitor to the planet on a mission from her captain. Now, Crumb's people are having their own internal struggles, and a stranger from the star only heightens tensions between them. I did find the main characters were well developed, and their contrasting personalities made for a great dynamic. However, the developments within their relationships often felt rushed in order to add conflict or progress the story. Ultimately, I would say that the story balances some of the character-driven aspects, but is mainly a plot-driven story. Now, with all that being said, this is a novella at 110 pages. So with how much is explored in this from the world, the characters, the circumstances, and just everything that happens, I can definitely see why those choices were made. It also works for the episodic and entertaining nature of the story, while setting the stage for future episodes within this series. The authors also introduce the world building with ease, pulling readers into hundreds of years of history and conflict quickly, while keeping an air of mystery. I was also surprised by some of the darker tones within the story. I know this was going to be gritty in some of the elements of Firefly, yet I was still left with a sense of hope despite all this. With suspense, bloody action, conflict between tribes, elements of dystopia, sci-fi, and space opera, Colony Collapse is an entertaining read. Overall, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I certainly think the pitch I was given holds up, and I do think this is a great read for fans of Star Trek or Firefly looking for their next sci-fi adventure. Finally, I read The Wick Watch by Jacquelyn Hagen. Now, I did receive a physical copy of this in exchange for an honest review from the author, and I will say, just a heads up, after finishing this, I went out and bought books 2 and 3 because I needed answers. The Wick Watch is a masterfully crafted story with such charm and intrigue that it quickly captured my heart. The story is steeped in magic, shrouded in mystery, and told with elegance. Throughout the book, we follow Inkwell Featherfield, a young boy who finds himself being chased by ghostly specters. While running for his life, a group of mysterious strangers offer him safety. Only everyone has their secrets, and Inkwell trusts no one. The story itself is told in a way that is somehow wholesome, adventurous, thrilling, and charming. Before reading this, before picking it up, I was actually falling into a bit of a reading slump, and I decided to try a few different audiobooks. Between the ones that I had tried, the Wick watch stood out. It just immediately captured my attention, and before I knew it, I was 4 chapters in and I couldn't put it down. I think a big reason for this is the main character, Ink. Though he's a young boy, he's mature for his age, plucky, witty, and charming. Relying on himself, he makes his own way in life as a cunning pickpocket. While he questions everyone and everything, he has its own mysterious air about him. The supporting casts are thoughtfully done as well. The attention to detail in the characters' arcs throughout the story's progression felt natural and retained the characters' integrity. While there is some development to these characters, it's done subtly and skillfully. There were plenty of moments that felt like a game of wits between the characters, and the psychological battles between them were just expertly done. I also can't forget to mention the incredible found family within this. Yes, that is my favorite trope, but I love how it was done here because even though I love the found family in this, I still have a lot of questions and even some doubt. I will say this is a meticulously plotted story that will have readers wanting more. No matter how I thought the story was going to go, the rug just continuously got pulled out from under me, leaving me questioning everything I thought I knew. It goes without saying that the mystery surrounding this story was intoxicating, making this unputdownable. In terms of the world building and its history, it's built seamlessly with the characters and the circumstances they go through. Set in a Victorian fantasy world, there were plenty of magical elements built into the everyday life of these characters, giving a familiarity to the world while keeping me entranced with the magic. I also found the pacing in this to be pretty well spot on for me, weaving in suspenseful moments alongside wholesome scenes really helped to bring the story to come together for me. A big reason this was helpful is it gave the story that bingeable feel. Just as you were reeling from developments, you were given a breath to process everything that had just happened. It was the perfect combination as I never felt overwhelmed and I only wanted more. It's also impressive how many different subgenres are blended into this story. There were elements of murder mystery, cozy fantasy, gaslamp fantasy, supernatural elements, some horror, and even thriller. Despite this mix, it never felt out of place. The Wick watch is unlike anything I've ever read. That alone should be enough to make you want to pick up this book, and if that's not, I can't recommend it enough. In fact, I often struggle to continue series in a reliable time frame. That's just how I am as a reader, unfortunately. For the first time in a long time, I felt compelled to continue the story back to back. I even made reaction shorts to the endings of this book and book 2. It was the worst book hangover I've had since the Threadlight trilogy by Zach Argyle, and honestly, I'm pretty thrilled about that. As I mentioned, I also did an immersion read with this with the audiobook, and that was narrated by Wayne Farrell, and it was impressive. The performance for this solidified Wayne Farrell as a new favorite narrator for me within audiobooks due to the small touches within his voice performances and voice acting that just made this story come to life. To top it all off, this is a debut, and that astounds me. Now, I've already read The Spider Key as of recording this, and I can tell you, somehow she ends up topping it. So absolutely, this is a series to check out. Of course, I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend checking out this series. This is an indie fantasy that you don't want to sleep on. And that is everything I read back in July. I had a great reading month, and I love that I was able to balance the genres a bit better last month. I found a new favorite. I had reading experiences I haven't had in years. It was just a great reading month. How about you? Did you find a new favorite back in July? How did your reading month go? Or is there a read that has been piquing your interest as of late? Leave your comments down below. I always love hearing from you. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care of yourselves.